would like to propose that every time one of the panelists uses the name of a band, not as the name of a band, that we have to drink. So if I say I work with Run the Jewels, no drinking. I mean, you can if you want to, but too much. However, if I say, Roxanne, it's nice to see you, and you say, you too. Ah. Optional. Optional. No one's really obliged to drink, but it could be fun. So let's introduce ourselves. Roxanne, last minute addition to the panel, thank you so much for joining us. What do you do?
I make music, so I'm the token artist. On the
More
panel.
than token, easy. Outstanding artist.
And I'm a singer-songwriter and on the board of the FAC, that's Featured Artists Coalition, and also run a little music conference in London that is from and for artists called From Me to You.
And you are the biggest Beatles fan in the world?
Do we all need to drink
No,
now?
because it's in the context. It's
okay.
This is more complicated than I thought.
Yes, I'm also the biggest Beatles fan in the world, and I'm happy to be questioned on that subject later on, so yeah.
Mark, how you doing?
Well, thank you. Mark Douglas. I've been the Chief Technology Officer at PPL for 7 years. I feel like I'm really showing my age. When they asked about how you discover music earlier, I used to thumb through vinyl album covers in Boots, the chemist record department, and listen to Annie Nightingale at 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening after the charts finished.
Would they prescribe you records, though?
No.
And now I'm going to go 3 doors down to Pat. This ain't going to work.
Cheers, Chris.
Cheers.
Hello, you heard this sort of preamble yesterday. My name is Pat Carr. I have been in the music industry for a wee while now. I primarily run various record labels and the first ever artist services and label management company back in the noughties. I ran Infectious twice, once in the 90s, both with Corda Marshall. Once in the 90s we had Ash, we merged with Mushroom, I had Garbage and Muse, and Peter Andre, of course, with my tip to the APRA guys. And then I ran my own consultancy, as I said, Remote Control. Then Corda and I got a bit drunk and started up Infectious again. And it went quite well with Temper Trap and various things. We got bought by BMG. I got asked to stay at BMG and set up their frontline recordings. So did that for 3 years, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I think I left them with a very solid and strong frontline recording business, which I'm very proud of. And now I have resurrected Remote Control, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. So I'm doing all sorts of consultancy across marketing, across albums, labels, companies, tech companies. I work with primary talent. I'm finding things that interest me. It's an umbrella of various sort of new consultants and people like that. So that's me, old and sort of slightly wizened, really.
Chris.
Hello again. I was on earlier.
You were on earlier, but go on, just in a nutshell.
So I'm GM at Communion. We're a record label, a promoter, and a publisher. Prior to that, I spent 10 years at Island Records and also had a brief sojourn in the comedy industry at a place called Avalon, working with sort of arena-sized comics. And that's me.
Nice. Summer Kim.
I'm Summer Kim. I'm a visible minority here. That's what I do. I make the metrics better. I'm head of business development at CI. CI is a supply chain company for independent music companies. So if you are a label, you can go through us without giving your share to the distributor. There's a lot in the room, so I'll be quick. I used to run a A&R management company and production company in South Korea, and I was entrepreneur. Yesterday, Chris talked about it. It was very, very hard and very, very physically damaging to me. So I moved to UK to have a sabbatical, and I just settled here and working at CI.
Amazing, great to have you. So this panel is kind of to...
Just for you know, I'm here. Pregnant woman can drink 1 unit of alcohol. This is it. So don't worry too much. I saved it all week for this moment, and I need to get a credit for it.
Amazing. So we're going to use this session to cover a couple of bits very quickly that we didn't get to cover at the conference or have been touched on, and then we're going to go out to industry questions. Industry questions, audience questions about the industry. Maybe too much beer, maybe not enough sleep, maybe just too much conference for Chris. We'll find out. Mark, let's deal with blockchain quick. Let's get it done. Let's have the 3-minute version. Is it going to rescue the world of data and sold?
Well, the short Scottish grumpy answer is no.
What is it good for?
Look, I think it possibly has some relevance in our industry. It's clearly not it's not a panacea for all of our problems. I wish people would talk more about the basics of data management. We're not doing enough to capture data at source around who performed on a song, who owns the copyright in a song. Blockchain's not the platform. Blockchain alone will not solve that problem. I think initiatives like Audley, like Imogen's Creative Passport, we need to be worrying about how you identify a performer. You know, a blockchain with a load of rubbish on it, just free text, is not going to help us one little bit. We need to have identifiers for musicians, we need to have identifiers for rights holders, and we need to get back to some good old-fashioned data management. Slightly worrying to think that record companies are now worrying about tagging music as they try and game algorithms for playlists. You know, we've been needing to tag music for decades with who actually performed on this song and who owns certain rights in it. And we've not been very good at that for several decades. So, yeah, once we get an agreed answer on who was on a song and who owns the rights, the blockchain might be a brilliant mechanism for publishing that and sharing it. But any idea that blockchain is going to, single-handedly solve our problems, it's not right.
I think there is a more to solve before we talk about blockchain. We're not really using identifier that well, like ISNI, ISWC, ISRC, even it's polluted. So we need to go the first step, educating everyone to be in the same page. I think blockchain will solve some parts of industry, some parts of really, really good technology going to come along, but not tomorrow. It will take a few years. It will take slowly introduced to industry, and it will need to create a trust, because I don't know how many are like really, really onto blockchain, but from sound recording point of it and then supply chain point of it, we actually solved this problem with the DDEX. And it's been there for a while. Obviously, people have argued DDEX is not
Is
solving
everyone familiar
everything.
with DDEX as a concept? So this is I'm getting a great face from one of the artists in the front row. Like, what? How would you describe DDEX? It's going to be the standard for...
So DDEX is a standard for sound recording to begin with. Since 2007, lots of people gather around the room and they just removed all the business people and the technical people just sitting down and talk about what kind of metadata we would need to go to the retail places. So that's how DDEX was set up, and most of the distribution companies, someone like CI, some of the older major labels, most of the music services are using DDEX standard to receive sound recording. So there is a standard somewhere.
I think what was interesting, I mean, this is so not my area, so it's amazing I'm actually talking about it, but as you know, I can very rarely shut up. But I was chatting with Vaughan, the guy was here yesterday from Jack's, and he just said a story which I think actually typifies all the problems. And he said that one of his first jobs as an intern was he was 16 and he was in a room with boxes of master tapes, writing down the copy that was on the master tapes into some sort of sheets that was then being put in to sort of say about ownership. Yeah. And he said he found it ironic that now, 15, 20 years later, he's setting up a company to undo that complete mess he made of it. And you can times that by how many people, I mean, you know, and I think I just loved that story. I thought it summed up a lot about where we are with data.
That's about another data thing, because 2 years ago when Benji Rogers was standing here and talking about blockchain to begin with, I asked a question: who's going to start creating that metadata? Who's responsible? Who has to do it? And he didn't satisfy my question, because it's not studio engineer, it's not the artist, it's a label, it's a publisher. There's a lot of questions around who is starting that data and who can fix it later on, and how much you can fix it. Like from sound recording, we deliver lots of independent labels, music, and then music services are asking, can you deliver publisher information? Do you think sound recording company care about publishing? And can you believe that information?
Sounds like a mess. Roxanne, from the artist's point of view.
Well, I thought it was interesting to hear on the previous panel about how everyone's just passing the buck, and I just can't help but be optimistic when artists are taking that responsibility. Because, you know, one theme of this conference has been like the rise and the success of independent music, and it's great to see artists such as Imogen Heap coming up with solutions to this problem, and I'm so excited for Mycelia and the Creative Passport. And isn't it interesting that it's the artists who clearly have the most vested interest in this thing actually working? But because, I mean, I started gigging, I had no idea about how anything works. You know, you don't start gigging because you think, oh, I can make £5 off PRS royalties from that show. So you just find out about these things sort of step by step, and then you see all the holes or the problems that are in the current system for one reason or another. So it's just interesting to me that it's the artists together with tech startups that are trying to come up with solutions to these problems. And hopefully, I'm quite optimistic that the industry, perhaps it won't be tomorrow, perhaps it will take 10 years, but at least it's being dragged along with that innovation.
So moving in the right direction. Enough blockchain for the audience? Oh, there's a hand gone up. I thought we'd escaped it. Rowan, what you got for us? No, kill it. Is there a question not about blockchain in the audience? Is there anything like we've talked about on the conference overall that isn't clear or you'd like to revisit? We're a little bit in your hands now. Hey, you have a question? Shall we get you a microphone? A question for Roxanne. Here we go.
As a fellow artist, what do you wish you were told at the start? Like, what would have helped you achieve more if you knew it?
Okay.
I think that's a great question.
So the question was, what do you wish you'd known as an artist that you know now, like starting out, what do you wish you'd known?
I wish I would have known.
Who got the credit for that one?
What was the band?
The blockchain was the shout. What do you wish you'd known? Blockchain.
I wish I would have known that the most important relationships to be formed are those with people who like your music and with other musicians. Like you get taught this fiction of, I need a manager, I need a label, but in reality it's making meaningful connections with people who do what you do to support one another. And all the, I've been making music full time for about 5 years now. It's been super DIY. Like when I tour, for the longest time, it was just me with a guitar and a suitcase on the mega bus. But I got those gigs through a musician network, and I stayed on sofas of musicians in that town. And I wish I would have just clocked onto that sooner, because I spent too much time, I hate this saying, but like running before you could walk, and like knocking on doors of management firms, and yeah. So that would be the one thing I wish I'd known.
And if you'd done that, you would have been able to knock on those doors further down the line and have them desperate to work with you, rather than feeling like they're doing you some sort of favour by working with you.
Yeah, I think, so this is part of what we do with the FAC. There's just educational work for artists that I'd be happy if the FAC and the MMF stopped receiving phone calls from artists saying, how do I get a manager? The idea is that you don't have to go knocking on doors. The idea is that now we live in a world where you can, create your own business. And of course it's about scale, right? So you come to that stage where you have to build a team, and your team will have to grow and grow. But yeah, I love this idea of the tables turning. Like it starts and ends with the music and the artists, and everything else is this wonderful ecosystem around it to support it. But this idea of, please, sir, could I have a deal? Like it just...
Yeah, that's one of the more damaging illusions for young artists. Like from my label hat on, when I've seen, particularly because we work with alternative artists, the stuff that really works is where exactly what you're saying is artists go out, they meet their fans face to face, hand to hand. Those first, like this whole conference, a lot of the conversations about what can we do well, what can we do more of, how can technology help, only works when you've already got a head of steam. Like it might be the first 500 people, whatever. That's what you build from. And what these conferences and what industry people are very bad at, because I don't think there is a very easy answer, is getting things going to those first 500 people. And from my experience, like I feel like when I was working with Mumford & Sons, the reason that appeared to go very quickly was because they'd spent 3 years sleeping on people's floors. And when the record was first played on the radio, like we all want to get our songs played on the radio, think that that's the big turning point. The point was it got played on the radio, and there were a few thousand people who picked up the phone and went, this is amazing, I've been with this band forever. That gives people the confidence to play it some more. There's also the word of mouth already going. And all of the wonderful things that labels and PR companies and technology can do only amplifies something that's in the real world. I mean, to the streaming conversation that was going on, or the search conversation that was going on just before this, like, whenever I've been to sit down with Spotify, they always say, do the grassroots right, and that will create enough momentum for the algorithm to pick you up. So it's music to my ears to hear artists sort of getting that a bit.
I mean, I can totally echo that in every way, and I think, again, a lot of the chat here has been about technology and the different ways of searching, I think, in the panel that we just had, but the basics are still the groundwork. You do the groundwork, and do it with love and care, and pay attention to your details and what you are and what you want to be, and it will all come, and we all know that there's certain things like, one playlist on New Music Friday, or one playlist on Radio 1 or whatever. If you haven't got the basics, if you haven't started to get a fan base and to be people in your own right, know what they're doing, you'll have a little blip and it'll disappear because you haven't built it. Don't build it on sand. Build it thoroughly and with care.
It's getting a seat at the roulette table when you play it that way.
That's
it. Maybe it connects, maybe it doesn't, but you've got nothing to fall back on.
Okay, good conversation. Sylvia, question in the front row. Let's get your microphone. I think it's microphone number 6, please.
I just wanted to follow on from that point, actually, because I'm interested to see what the panel thinks about this. Do we think that with all the talk about Spotify and playlists and the importance of pitching for playlists and getting onto playlists, are we doing a disservice to the artist community in making them think that that's the holy grail? That's what they need to be aiming for at the expense, not at the expense of everything else, but basically it's all about just trying to get a track on a playlist and then your career will be done. You'll have made it.
There's always been a version of that for as long as I've been working in music, whether it be a Radio 1 playlist is what to do it, or getting 1 million YouTube views, or like, there's always the whatever.
MySpace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's always been the thing that everyone's looking at that moment. Like, Spotify playlists are undoubtedly powerful, and like, but they're not the only thing. Like, Rowan and what he did with Bears Den was just took the bands on the road, and there was an undoubted connection between that band and their fans, and then at a point they're selling so many tickets, everything else comes and it helps. I think you can think about playlists. I was thinking about this earlier. You can think about having a hit as sort of like those ridiculous competitions like Red Bull do, where you have to create a flying machine and you come down the ramp and you jump. Like, all of the groundwork you do is the building of that ridiculous flying machine and whether it will fly or not, and the playlist is the ramp. So, like, if you get a New Music Friday, great, you go, great run up. But if your ridiculous flying machine can't fly, you're screwed. That's how I see it.
And the other thing as well, just and I'm sure you'll echo this, is that I think, and that's one thing that hasn't been spoken about quite so much, is it's also about the music, It's about write really good songs, make really good music that you're proud of and that you love. And no, I'm not going to say it's all going to come out. If you write a good song, it'll be a hit. No, we've all worked with artists that we loved and desperately thought they were brilliant, and for one reason or another it hasn't happened. But, it is actually all about the music, and don't forget that. You get caught up in playlists. Write the songs, babe.
It's so difficult question. Like, I manage artists, actually. She's a Korean artist singing in English, and she's now back to Korea, but she used to be in London. Because she is Asian looking, it was really hard for her to break into any Western market, because even though she sings in English, doesn't really appeal. So we went route to targeting Spotify Asia. So featured in a Spotify Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, name it. She went to all the viral charts and was fantastic. But the artists, I think it's down to the artists actually themselves. My artist particularly, she really she doesn't care whether she's on the playlist or not. Because she writes a song and she's happy. And obviously she's a full-time musician, but most of her earnings coming from songwriting she has done. And as I talked about the K-pop, she is asked to write a song for a K-pop act, even though she's not a K-pop particularly the genre. So this artist, I worked so hard to make it to playlist, make it to a New Music Friday and a viral chart #1 in Taiwan and Hong Kong and everywhere. She's like, oh, that's great. That was the only thing I heard. It's
That's
like,
why I will never manage.
yeah, what I have done for you, you know? It's like, I thought you will like it, but she's just like, oh, yeah, thanks.
I would answer your question with yes, it does do a disservice. I'm saying this on camera, but yeah, these things are great if you want to make an impression with people in meeting rooms, and if you want to make that, you know, if you want to, find people to work with. Unfortunately, those are the kind of things you need. It means nothing. So often it means nothing. I mean, the amount of artists I know who have millions of streams on Spotify and they can't get 10 people to come to their show. I mean, these stats, you can get something from these stats, how many Facebook likes, how many Twitter followers, how many Spotify plays, etc. But it doesn't really give you much in terms of what kind of engagement you have and what kind of relationships you have with your fans.
All streams are not created equal is definitely something.
Here.
Well, there's
It's,
a tweet.
it's definitely coming down
Yeah.
down the road, because particularly we do a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, and you see artists have one song with 20 million streams, and you're like,
Exactly.
and like you say, they don't sell tickets because they're sitting on a place and that's generating it. Whereas other acts with many fewer streams are selling a lot of tickets, and then so the question then becomes about what is the metric that you're going after to determine how you're going to.
Oh, metric, good shout. Thank you, Sills. Metric.
What is the metric you're going after that's going to like predict success, or what is success? Like what if someone's business might just be, I need millions of streams, I don't care where they come from, but most people here are trying to build career artists over time, and that's about tickets, it's about merch, it's all sorts of other things.
And there's streaming when it's on, or there's listening. And, you know, a lot of those playlists, you know, they are designed to be background music.
And so you'd much rather be on a proactive playlist than piano songs, broadly speaking, because people play piano songs to hear piano. They care less for you. There was an article in The Guardian that explains it all very well, but a guy had a massive boost in streams because he was on a playlist. He dropped off the playlist, everything dropped away. That was his experience, and it was deliberately picking on piano songs as the one, because it's really quite intuitive that you were looking for that rather than for new music you might engage with. But it was a really disappointing moment for him when it all went away again, especially I don't think he chased it, but to answer your question, like, had he been after that, you suddenly get millions of streams because you're on a playlist. But there's no connection, there's no relationship, there's no smiling, I was on the merch desk, I sold that thing to you, there's none of that, and it goes away very quickly.
I think it came up in the last conversation. It's like the playlist needs to be a gateway to something. I think the real question is what happened next? You know, did they add you to a private playlist? Did they go and look at the rest of your catalogue? Did they go and look at bands that sound like you? That's what really matters. Yeah, a headline appearance on a playlist, that could have been to 10 million people in a very passive, kind of laid-back situation. You know, you need to know you've got engagement, so you've got to go much deeper than just looking at that superficial metric.
Completely agree. I can see, so Rowan had a question first at the back. Promise me it's not the blockchain one from earlier. Good man.
It's quite tense, this waiting for the question,
Cheers.
isn't it?
I wasn't going to drink to metric again. No, it's been done.
Hoping not to double up on the secondary ticketing question, but it is a ticketing general kind of question. So a particular band that we worked with did a show in Los Angeles with a particular ticketing company that had exclusivity on that venue. The show was priced at $18 for a ticket, but by the time you got to check out with an e-ticket, so there's nothing printed or posted, it was $26. That's an increase of 44%. To you guys, the future heads, tell us. I worked on that. Yeah.
It's a long walk for that one.
Thank you. In 5 years' time, what does that look like? Is that the same situation? Is it going to change? And if it is going to change, who are the people who are going to make that change?
I forgot all the entire question. I was too busy drinking. Can you sum it back up again for me?
There's a lot of forces at play.
Yeah.
Obviously, America is quite different to the UK at the moment. And I don't have a crystal ball, but there's definitely a version of the future where certain companies own venues, control the ticketing, and as we discussed in the previous panel, there's incentives there to try and claw back revenue from other places, and you're probably sadly a bit of a passenger in the situation. When it gets to that point, it's important to support independent promoters and independently minded people.
No, you're right. I mean, it's the same always, isn't it? I mean, the independent labels, the independent shops, they're all the people that are going to be more innovative and those sorts of things. But there's a web that's happening, and it's not my area, or I don't know how to break it. But as a consumer, it's really bloody irritating.
We've got about 3 questions on that side. So Shouter was first, and then Kath just got offered a beer instead of a microphone and looked very upset. And then we're coming over here to Helena. No, you're good. No, I said, did you want a mic? But it's okay. Shouter, you have a mic. Go.
Yes, I do. I feel at home. This is a question that I often muse on.
Uh-oh. That's better than amusing, which could have been an option.
Yeah. In terms of the way that, Spotify and streaming, I don't want to just attribute this entirely to Spotify, but streaming has so vastly affected the way that people consume and listen to music and even buy it, in terms of the fact that they don't really anymore. Do we think that we're going to reach a point where live music is similarly affected by these technological advances, such as via VR live streaming, to the point where a band or an artist is essentially performing to an empty room and a load of people are sitting at home watching, and they're expected to generate that same sort of live feeling and emotion and everything to computer screens, essentially? Do we think that's going to happen?
Oh, good question.
Over my dead body. I mean, how sad would that be? I mean, yes, I think it has a place, but you want to be there, you want to be sweated on, you want to be jostled with, you want to, but you want all that. Sitting in a living room watching people having a good time is not my idea of a good time.
I disagree.
Good.
I've never been to Glastonbury. I love watching Glastonbury on TV because you don't have to walk. You don't miss any of the acts. For me, having a shower is important. So I think I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, but I'm a music fan, but sometimes I just don't want to go and hassle with people. Just like, I want to sit in my living room and watch amazing things from my living room because technology allows me to do so. Artists might not agree, but I don't know, you guys have seen Portland, the series. They have one episode and they have the VR headset and they have a drone to go into festival. So 2 people sitting in the living room and are watching what's going on in the festival. And then drone actually crushed to a tree and then someone just smashed the drones because it annoys people in the site. But I think there might be slight chance of coming along. And also we can't really, ignore people who cannot be there because physically they're not living in UK, they're not living in US, so they don't want to miss it. And it's probably cheaper if you're watching at home.
But Glastonbury to an empty field would be a bit dull.
Go on, Roxanne.
I think people have been talking about this for a really long time, and I think VR is a very interesting add-on. I don't think it's ever going to replace a real-life experience.
Amazing. That was what I was going to say.
And that interaction that you have, when you're performing with an audience, you couldn't have that. That you do have interaction with a camera, and it's important to do, and it's something you've got to learn. But you don't have it the same as you have with an audience, dancing or staring at you or tearing up or whatever they do when they watch bands.
Amazing. Tim, did you want to comment at this point? Is that why you're waving so frequently?
Yeah, so how does the panel feel about Roy Orbison's forthcoming
What?
I was
So,
unaware. I
hologram
presume
tool.
this is a hologram type affair.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit spooky.
Well-known Korean virtual reality pop stars and others that do not exist but entertain live audiences.
I mean, I was frustrated enough at heritage bands coming back round and squeezing out grassroots artists. If those who are no longer with us can come back as well, I'm going to get grumpier still.
It's just a different thing, isn't it? Like, it's a thing that exists that people might enjoy, but it's not the same thing as being there at the time and seeing the artist. And like, I think you can get on a high horse and say, "Oh, it's."
A less valid experience.
No
but
one's
it makes
said
it
invalid,
a
we're saying different.
Makes it a
Different.
different experience.
I put it up there with, like, you know, you go and see what's the Queen show in the West End.
We Will Rock You.
It's one of the worst things you'd
Is
never
it?
go and see.
I
Yeah, it's
haven't
awful.
gone there. But
I think it almost proves we shouldn't be worried. If you're willing to turn up to watch something virtual, you're acknowledging that it's actually about the experience of being there with other people. You can't reproduce the sound or the emotional kind of drama you go through of being at something live.
It
And
could
if you
be
look
fun.
outside our industry, you know, football, you know, people, we benefit from the same thing. Demand massively outstrips supply. The stadiums are still full every Saturday, even though it's readily available at largely no cost. So I personally, I'm not. It's not my
I think
particular
it,
domain,
like,
but I'm not
it
worried.
could definitely be fun. Like, I can imagine having a good time at something like that. It's not the same thing, and there's a whole bunch of weird, ethical, like who's paying to put it out, who's getting paid for it. You're exploiting someone's intellectual copyright and putting words in their mouth posthumously. A whole host of philosophical questions that make me uneasy with it, but like fundamentally, like you might have a good time at it. Like people listen to records and at the show. Like it's fun.
I'm going to
I
move
think
us
you would,
on
but
there.
where would the if you only have that sort of
gonna
thing,
move
where
us
will the
on there.
new Roy Orbisons come from? Sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, that's good. Kath, what you got?
So I'm the broken record. But I've been listening the last 2 days, and you all talk about smart speakers and Spotify and Apple and Deezer and you name it. It's like, hang on a second, that's 1% of the world.
It is,
So
but we
I
will
come from
also-
a country where I must be one of only 2 people that owns a smart speaker because Amazon decided to give me one. You know, so my question is, I've never heard Savin or QQ or KKBox or any of these mentioned, and I'm just curious, if we're going to talk about the future of music, when do we start looking beyond the echo chamber?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point. It's a European music conference aimed at European markets, and most people work domestically, which is why there's the focus on where their consumers are at right now. In terms of, sorry, a bit defensive. But I think in terms of the audience who are in the room and most of where their future will be, I think that's why it hasn't come up. In terms of opportunity in Africa, I think we pay no attention. I've tried not to swear on stage. It pisses me off. When I was at Universal, we didn't pay enough attention to an emerging market which was wildly different to what we knew. We stuck to what we knew.
But all this music is being played on radio back home. Yet no one looks at any of those markets who still consume all of this music.
I think
No,
that is
I agree.
actually
It's the
changing.
same.
I think if you walk into any major label at the moment,
The Orchard do, according to
Orchard
Niku.
yeah, if you walk into most of the big labels at the moment, they're having panicked meetings going, you know what, we used to put out records domestically, and if they were a hit, we'll chase them everywhere else. Now, because you can monetize whenever anyone listens to something, that everyone's sort of going, how do we do this? And they don't know, and they're going to work it out. But like anecdotally, things are happening. What, like for example, planning meetings have to start. This is an anecdotal thing, but in a certain major label, planning meetings now have to start with international at the top of the agenda. Anyone that's been in a major label planning meeting knows that international used to be last on the agenda. So things are changing in that respect.
And from a musical repertoire point of view, I think we're seeing the opposite happen. That you're seeing more and more prominence of Latin American music. And I think possibly to the detriment of African music, that's a much longer conversation. But the essence of one stream being worth one stream wherever it happens means that there's an opportunity for these large countries that have been underrepresented for a long time to start punching at their weight. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see going forward. So I'm less concerned about the services, but the repertoire, I think, will start to eke into the conversations.
On the independent structure, I mean, I know I've worked sort of over the years, right from First Infectious times, and I can't remember his name, the guy that's got the label now whose son runs it, does a lot of the incoming European stuff. Oh, God, what's the guy's name? He runs a record label. It's one of the biggest indies in South Africa, or so he told me when I put my records through.
Gallo. Is it Gallo? Gallo.
No. David Gresham, thank you. David Gresham. I've worked with him for a long time, and he was always very proactive, but we only ever seemed to get so far. You know, I mean, Ash, I think, was some, you know, we had a lot of interest from Ash, and in fact, that was something that was work. Alt J finally went there, but it took a while. So, I mean, I have tried, and it's just, yes, it does, but it drops off the bottom of the agenda because there's so many other places to go, you know, and it's just like, okay, well, we do this, we do that, we'll do the other. So, but yeah, noted.
Cool. Someone pointed out that I said Europe. Cheers.
Asia.
Hello. No, they've run away. I tell them, like, take the mic back as soon as the question's been asked, but they're so scared. They see the look in the eyes. We had a question from Helena. So sorry, we're sending you all over, Michael, but... Come around the front. No, Abby, sorry, you've been looked over. There's a queue.
Next.
I'm sure it's a good one. We'll get to you.
Although my question is very similar to on the same line as Kath, but I wanted to ask it because I want 5 seconds of summer and the rest of the panel.
Good work. Good work. Good work.
God, it took you forever. So, along the same lines, we had a massive hit with Despacito this year, massive global hit. We've had Gangnam Style. Where does the panel think the next global hit is going to come from?
Ooh, on camera, people, no pressure. I'm just moderating.
But they're great songs, though. I don't think it matters where they came from. I think they happened to be, you know, in sort of different languages or from, you know, or from different places. They're actually just undeniable. So, I mean, Gangnam Style, I mean, it's all about the, you know, and that was something that caught on. Everybody bought into it, and I think it crossed all barriers. You know, it crossed all nationalities. So, yeah, it's whoever writes a song as strong as that with a silly dance. I mean, you know, and look, I'm not being snobby about it. God love them, great. You know, there's room for those.
That must mean the next one's coming from Scotland, because we're quite good at silly dances.
I'm saying nothing.
I don't know, you have seen 88 Rising? 880 Rising is a Chinese guys in a YouTube channel. Have a look, because they're amazing. I mean, they're Chinese, they rap in Chinese, but the company is based in New York. The Chinese descent and there's a Korean descent, and all the Asian diaspora, they have been very, very upset about why Asians are underrepresented in the US, for example. So I wouldn't say this is the worldwide thing, but I think the more and more music industry will accept language is not a problem. Like all of this we have seen, Gangnam Style singing in Korean. And I was like, you don't even know what Gangnam means. My hometown, by the way. But people do that. And then BTS breaking into US, they were singing in Korean. So there has been lots of attempts to breaking into US market from Korea, from China, from Japan, but never made it because just it doesn't matter the language. And I think the more and more we realize it's good song, good performance, and then people just bought into it.
But Despacito slightly benefited from a certain Mr. Bieber. Like, that transformed that song from being a big song to a proper international smash. So there's still quite a lot of cultural hegemony going on. I don't think we're quite at the place where just pure music transcends everything. A liberal dose of marketing helps.
Okay. Next question. Sam Potts hiding over here. And then Abby will come to you. Unless it's complicated, I won't understand it. Just checking.
My question segues quite well from that. I want to talk about feature culture.
Great question.
Because hip-hop, urban music, whatever you want to call it, is obviously, in Western markets anyway, probably the biggest genre at the moment. How much do you think that streaming services has been responsible for that? And I'm talking probably more Spotify than anything else, given the fact that feature culture increases your addressable audience. Is it a self-perpetuating thing that we're seeing here? Or is it actually that this music is just having a purple patch at the moment?
I think it's very hard to disengage with a little bits of that equation. I think obviously that kind of music has just culturally arrived in the last 5 or 10 years. It's been building for 30 years, 40 years. And, you know, generations have changed and stuff. But the feature culture thing is like a perfect storm. So, traditional rock and pop acts, very guarded about bringing other acts up. I think there's a culture of you don't want to give someone else a chance because they might take your space in the spotlight. And for whatever reason, and I don't profess to know, hip-hop has never had that problem. It's always been about guesting on other people's records, and it's been about the cosign. And from a purely marketing point of view, that's absolute genius, because what do radio stations respond to? Stuff that's already got a proof of concept. So if you've got one artist who's already up and running and you need to break a new artist, put the new artist on the guaranteed hit. Now that new artist has been on a hit, and now they're a guaranteed hit, and so the cycle completes. And from my, like, in my world, rock and indie bands just don't do that. It doesn't fit in the culture, and it makes it difficult to thrive. Then you throw on top of that the way that digital services work by attaching you to other stuff that you may like, and it's just the perfect storm for self-promotion.
Perfect.
It's been around a bit, though. I mean, Walk This Way. I mean, that was genius. You ever put that together? That was a seminal moment, that record.
Right, Nicky, stop being polite. Shout it out.
Sorry, no, isn't that because hip-hop was traditionally not, so it's got a wider cultural relevance where you're creating your own space because no one's given it to you.
Almost certainly, yeah.
So, absolutely. So since you were fighting for space, you were fighting together. It's kind of the essence of it, rather than having that natural pop space, that natural rock space where the attention was there. Okay, interesting point.
But also with hip-hop, obviously, just quickly, the feature culture doesn't come from the rappers, it comes from the producer. The producer had the means of recording and creating the beat, and he would just pull all his friends together, and it would happen that you had X rapper and other rapper in the room on the same day. And they got on and got stoned.
There we go. They got on, they got stoned, they rapped. For those on the far side of the room, that was because it was producer-led. It's the suggestion that you kind of... I'm going to have to stop people shouting out now. It was fun while it lasted. Abby, how you doing?
Okay, this is a very different question. So, typically when you talk about the future of the music industry, you're thinking of, okay, what are the major companies? So if you think of the consumer companies, whether it's the streaming companies or if you think of the labels, that's where the innovation is going to come from. Now, I'm coming from a startup. I can count on my fingers how many investors when we spoke with, our initial beachhead sector is the music industry. Immediately, investors just run away. Right? And the first thing is, why aren't you guys focusing on finance? Or because given that our tech can be applied in a number of sectors. Now, if you just expect the innovation, not you as in not you, but in terms of if the music industry just expects innovation to come from within itself, it'll be a long time before that happens, because typically industries need to be disrupted before innovation can come through. So how can you actually foster innovation to come through from startups and give them the confidence that is there without usually it being fizzled away?
An investor confidence, or for startups to feel encouraged that the music industry is listening? Sorry, which one?
Investor confidence.
Investor confidence. How can we restore investor confidence in a world where crowd mix existed?
It's naturally increasing. Don't you think? There's more money in the music industry flowing into it. My husband is an investment banker, and he often talks to music companies. And there's more money coming into it, and they're more interested in it.
I really hope the Spotify DPO goes very well and restores a bit of confidence in the music industry as somewhere worth putting your money. Have we got more audience questions out there? We've got Stu Dredge, who very politely always waits till the last minute to ask his question. He's a gentleman. There is a microphone coming.
Everyone's going, the beer can't start now, what a git. The diversity session yesterday was something that stuck in my mind, and I wondered if you guys would like to attend that, and sort of how optimistic do you feel about this whole men at work issue, if there's Australians in? How do you feel about that we as all of us can sort of figure this out and find a good path forward?
I don't mind going last.
In general, I think the decentralization of the industry has been a really good thing for gender equality and equality in general. So I'm going to try and be really brief with this. The talk yesterday too stuck in my mind. I thought it was excellent. This whole Me Too movement and this whole sentiment of, isn't it great that we're having this conversation now? I can't help but feel, no, isn't it shocking that we're only having this conversation now? So, what was your question? Drinking game. Yeah, I think it is that. Well, I think it was Ruth Barnes who used to have a show on Radio 1 and then had her own show called The Other Woman, who just said, like, yeah, we just have to wait for them all to die. So that's one answer.
It's a bit slow for Jen's taste, at least.
True. I'm I take great solace in the fact that there are a lot of great people doing very interesting things, and the fact that there is so much more space now to. I think the time of reaching everyone is over, but the plus side of that is that there is so much more space for previously marginalized voices to be heard, and new stories to be told, and for new leadership models, and for the numbers to then back it up, to see like, oh, that actually works. That's great. Let's have more of that.
Any other strong views from the panel?
I'm very positive about it, but I think we really, really need to educate people. Education is the key. I had a question yesterday to Jen, and then I wanted to repeat again. My firm, SCI, I have a brilliant boss who came up with a metrics to hire people, not to hire someone like you. So basically, we just tried to put together a questionnaire to make the character we want to have in the company, and then value. So we need to have a shared value which drives everything. If you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, partners, husband, wife, you share the value. That's driving the force. So we end up in a company, we're very small, but we end up in a company, everybody have very different preferences, they're very different lifestyle, but they all love certain things the company has to offer. So those things has to go from the education. I was suggesting Nina to AIM to have a session of how to hire people, to make the diversity. I think the fact that Live Nation was having Jan there, it's amazing. But not all the small companies can afford it, especially if you are running a management company, if you're running your manager and then you have a band. You can't really achieve diversity in a band, you know? But having that mind, having the education in your brain, it's really, really helpful, and it's the way to go.
Perfect.
I'm just going to say one very, very simple thing. Sitting up here, you look around the audience and look at the kind of diversity of the audience, and we've got to have hope. You know, this is a very different audience makeup from probably 4 years ago.
I completely agree.
And also, just for me, I mean, I started in this industry in the 80s. I mean, I was a fetus, obviously. But I mean, it was a very, very, very different place. And, you know, the fact that my name was Pat was, I mean, everybody assumed I was, you know, it was particularly as I sort of rose up. Well, I was, you know, people would, oh, you're a girl. You know, amazing. And all the other stuff as well. So, yes, I think there is hope because we're talking about it. You know, the Me Too, people are talking about it. It's open. You can say, oi, no, don't. You know, that hug was that little bit too long. Fuck off. You can say it now. And, you know, you couldn't. So, yes, I think there is hope because we're talking about it.
Okay, we're going to change direction. Any more questions? No more questions. I've got a question. Roxanne, would you like an M&M? Worked all week on that. Merlin.
I'm totally pro every diversity and everything, but isn't it all sometimes becoming a bit too politically correct? Because in the music scene there is crazy people, that's part of the music scene, and nowadays when someone shouts something stupid like Rapper Booth that we told yesterday about, there's a whole outrage, and is everything now not getting censored?
Yeah, but there's a difference between being a total twat. No, there is. This comes up a lot. This comes up. There's a very distinct difference between being abusive and being out of order and not doing that. Like, you know you're being a twat. And part of the reason it's been allowed to go on so long is because it's put down a banter. And that's a very dangerous opinion to have in order to keep it floating around. There's a definite difference.
Yeah.
Wasn't going to interrupt, was just going to echo it so everyone could hear
exactly.
it.
And you know what it is. You know what it is. You know when you're saying something because you're a twat and you know when you're saying something because you're on the edge of things, you know.
But there is often forgotten about the diversity, what diversity means. Is it look different, like ethnically diverse, or gender diversity? There's a lot more. There's a social diversity. There's the LGBT community. It's not about gender. It's about different people. And the social diversity is so important. If you don't pay your intern, just don't have intern. Because people cannot get into the industry.
Well said. Okay, go on, Roxanne, go on.
I think it's important to refer back to the talk yesterday, that it's all about the intent behind what's being said. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I believe that is all the time we have, unless there are any killer questions out there. No pressure. So Chris Sheehan, mate, you're here as the ticket winner from last year. By the way, fill in your survey. We really do give out free tickets afterwards. Chrissy boy, fresh from Abbey Road on minimal sleep, big moment.
Not very much sleep, yeah. If we're talking about the future of the industry, the future of the people who are making the music, given how short artists' careers tend to be now, what are we doing to make sure that the income is long enough to sustain these people? And what are we doing, because I do a bit of work with Help Musicians UK, what are we doing to safeguard for those guys that can't afford to live and that music has been their life and they come out the other side and get illnesses and get sleep deprived like this? I guess what I'm trying to do is put Help Musicians UK and charities like that on the menu. I think it's really important that we're supporting those people so that those that gave their life to music and have got nowhere to go afterwards get supported.
So
what more can we do as an industry to safeguard the future of guys that have given everything and can't support themselves?
And what can we do with current artists to make sure they never find themselves in that position?
Exactly, yeah.
Firstly, I applaud. Obviously, I think we all do. We're not daft. We applaud those efforts and everything else, and that's true. I also think that the way that with streaming and everything else, it's actually elongating bands' careers. People can, those the 80s, the 90s playlists, some of those, are putting, there's people that I work with or have worked with, who are now discovering bands from the 90s or even the early noughties or whatever that they never knew. They're like, oh my God, this is really good. And they're finding it again and they're streaming it. So I think that. And look at all the heritage acts on tour. I mean, my husband was in Pop Will Eat Yourself, for God's sake. I mean, I've never seen so many fat bald people in T-shirts at gigs,
It's harder for some of the acts now to make the space. Because so many of those older acts, the massive acts that have that huge investment, are taking up a lot of that space.
But some of the smaller ones, I think, are coming through as well. I mean, there's a band I work with on Infectious called Cable, they're one of the best bands I've ever worked with. But they're streaming now, and it's like, I know they're noticing it. And they never did very much when we put them out.
One, it's just admirable and decent to help people who have kind of, as you say, given their lives to music. I think thinking about what the music industry is starting to look like and the incredibly long tail, there's a sort of a responsibility and an incentive for people to think long term in the deals they're doing. Like the days of trying to get a big check now, because hopefully it will blow up and then your life will be fine, are behind us. And doing a deal which safeguards your income for the next 50 years, because now your record isn't gone from the shops, it's in effectively a virtual shop window forever. That should be at the forefront of people's minds when they're people who represent artists are negotiating deals. I think that's just going to become increasingly important. And actually, for young artists, we might be on the cusp of the tables turning a little bit, and there being a lot of power in their hands in the kinds of deals they'll be able to do.
Owning their own rights.
Exactly.
Let me give a PPL perspective on this. I mean, everything you say is absolutely right about kind of charitable stuff and all the rest of it, but let's get them paid for what they did in the first place. So actually it kind of loops back to what I said at the start. Let's get the data management problem solved. Let's get the people that contribute to music kind of acknowledged as such and in the databases, and let's make sure they actually get paid. Because the one benefit of streaming and all the rest is it is opening up the long tail of music. There's a more diverse selection of music being listened to. The money can flow, but it can only flow if we capture the data. We are still adding, in any given year, we can be adding several 100,000 musical contributions to our database as people come forward and go, look, I think I played the cymbals on that track or whatever. But it's a slow process because the industry has not been good for decades at capturing this stuff.
Or people not knowing they were on tracks. It's like, oh, well, I played drums on that. Well, you deserve some money. Do I?
Yeah. So so an element of education, an element of good data management, and an element of people listening to it a whole lot more for a whole lot longer could be a good place. That is all the time we have. That brings to a close Fast Forward 2018. Thank you guys very much.
Well done, Chris.